Okay, those were just a few characters. There are of course some more minor characters who we'll look at. This is just a diagram of the plot. So on the left hand side, part 1, you'll see that focuses more on the children, childhood, growing up, parenting, those kind of themes, and of course Boo and the intrigue and suffering. Also courage with Mrs. DeBose. The right hand side, the trial, and then of course the two plot lines, the two subplots come together with Boo saving the children from Bob Ewell at the end. Okay, so part 1, just a few images there from the film, very successful film. Starting off with the children, Scout introduces her family history. She's wondering where to start the narrative, and of course Jem's broken arm. Dill arrives and their games begin, and of course they discuss the Boo rumours, which Jem actually spreads all these ideas of him being a phantom and eating squirrels and being a really monstrous kind of grotesque creature in their imagination. And of course he dares to go as close to the Radley lot as possible. In chapter 2, Scout starts school. It's not a very good experience of education. Miss Caroline is quite set in her ways and strict in her adherence to new teaching methods, and she doesn't want Scout reading ahead. She doesn't want her getting ahead of the group. She seems to outsmart Miss Caroline, and she interprets that as being cheeky. And we meet poor Walter Cunningham, who really can't afford to feed himself. Okay, Miss Caroline is quite shocked by the poverty that the children live in Alabama at this time. Chapter 3, that's when Walter comes around for dinner, and Scout's quite insensitive. He puts syrup on his food, and she thinks he's ruined it, but Calpurnia corrects her. It's not his fault, it's just different people. So she gains a grain of compassion there, at least, and understanding. Obviously that's part of growing up. Scout clashes with Calpurnia quite a few times. Miss Caroline then meets a much worse example of cultural ignorance. Boris Ewell, who's very dirty, unwashed, hungry, very rude, and volatile, only shows up at school for a few days just to sign on effectively and then leave. And that's the way of the Ewells and has been for years. Atticus agrees to keep reading to Scout secretly, so Scout does have a passion for reading. And Scout says that so long as Miss Caroline doesn't find out, they can keep doing that. Chapter 4, so the gifts start to arrive in the knothole. Obviously some of these gifts are very symbolic, and this is starting to build the intrigue about who's putting them there. Jem seems to work it out quicker than Scout. Atticus reprimands the children for their dramas, so they actually come up with some plays based on the Radley family. Dill obviously taking some starring roles. At the end, when they're messing around and they're told off, there is a suggestion there, the humour that Arthur has, that Boo Radley has, inside the house. They hear laughing. Now Miss Maudie, she's one of the good examples, good role models, female role models for Scout. She's very critical of what she calls the foot washing Baptists, the ones who are extremely devout and strict in their views, condemn her for even having flowers. She says that she's religious, but she's a religious moderate, like a lot of the people in Maycomb. She doesn't like the reputation that Boo has. She thinks it's unwarranted. She defends Boo. He never was a problem for her, and obviously she hasn't seen him for a long time, but she doesn't like Scout thinking of him as a monster. And the children try to give Boo a note. This is the fishing line plot, and Atticus warns them off. Remember, they try to lure him out with ice cream. That's a very childish attempt. Again, the children persist despite Atticus's warnings, and I think Jem learns something from this. They try to look into the Radley house, and they nearly get into a lot of trouble here. They find themselves running for their lives. Nathan Radley, who's taken over from Mr. Radley, keeping Boo imprisoned, fires his shotgun to warn them off. And Jem eventually returns for his trousers, a very brave move. and of course finds them mended. More carvings, more gifts found in the knothole. Obviously the carvings are of Jem and the Scout, so it's clear that whoever's in the house, i.e. Boo, is watching them carefully. This upsets Jem greatly when Nathan Radley fills in the knothole. Obviously the suggestion is there that he's realised what his brother is doing and is trying to prevent him from having any kind of links to the outside world. And Jem has the sensitivity and the empathy to understand that that's a great tragedy. This is a small part of the novel, but Mr. Avery, just one of their kind of quirky neighbours. Jem and Scout make a snowman made of mud and all sorts of things, and it ends up looking like Mr. Avery, and then they turn it into a more female character, a morphodite, a hermaphrodite, a transsexual. Just a little bit of humour in the novel. But following that, there's tragedy. Miss Maudie's house burns down. She doesn't care too much. She's not materialistic. Her values are much more based on people. That's what she values. And Scout received the blanket, the brown woolen blanket. She doesn't realise, but evidently it must have been Boo. And this is just a tantalising sense of what could have been. If she turned round, she would have seen him. And that's the great mystery for the children. He's given her a blanket to keep her warm while she's outside, hoping that their house won't catch fire from Miss Maudie's. Chapter 9. Atticus is concerned. This is the kind of overlap as the trial starts to begin and the word spreads that Atticus has taken on the job of defending Tom Robinson, which is of course a thankless task in that community. The family Christmas is very tense. Number one, because of Miss Alexandra, who picks on the Scout throughout. She does kind of mellow towards the end when she realises that the Scout is growing up and becoming a little bit more of a lady. Uncle Jack, who is a comical character in many ways, Atticus' brother, punishes Scout for hitting Francis. Obviously, he doesn't know that Francis, Scout's cousin, insulted Atticus and called him a nigger lover and really provoked Scout. Scout doesn't want to share that. She hides that and just says that Francis called her a whore lady, that it was just a normal squabble. And Uncle Jack punishes her quite harshly and really regrets it. He's not a parent himself, and Atticus gives him some advice. You've got to be honest with children, and you have to hear both sides of the story before you act. So it's a reflection on Atticus' parenting style. He's very even-handed, and Uncle Jack obviously regrets this mistake. Atticus allows Scout to eavesdrop in his conversation with Jack about his anxieties about the trial, so he wants the children to be warned of what's to come. And he does impart some wisdom there just indirectly. Scout listening to him talking about what's to come and how they might be treated in the schoolyard because their father is defending a black man. And that's all intentional. Chapter 10 is an example of Atticus's abilities that he's hidden, or he doesn't really boast about because he's not that kind of man, he's a gentleman. The children don't really admire him for much. Miss Maudie says he's a great man, you just don't appreciate it. Talks about him playing the Jew harp and obviously his skills in legislation, but that doesn't really mean much to the children, especially Jem. But when the rabid dog comes down the street and the sheriff hands the gun to Atticus, who shoots it pretty much right between the eyes in one shot, and the whole history of Atticus being a dead eye with a gun makes the children very proud, and all of a sudden Jem, who's quite cynical about becoming a lawyer, has great admiration again for his father and expresses it. The final chapter of part 1 then. Mrs. DuBose goes too far and Jem loses temper. Scout says that Jem has a slow fuse and quite a tranquil disposition, but she pushes him too far in insulting his father, and he destroys their flowers. The punishment for that is that Jem and Scout have to read to her. The reason why she asks for that is that she can get through her withdrawal symptoms as she comes off morphine and she's in a great deal of pain. The reading helps to distract her and put her at ease. That, of course, is an example of courage that Atticus wants the children to see because it shows determination. She knows that she's beaten. She knows that she's effectively dying, but she wants to rid herself of this drug dependency. and it takes great bravery to overcome it. Okay, part 2. So this obviously focuses on the trial and the children getting to grips with the community they live in and the sense of injustice. Atticus is away on business. He's dealing with the trial now, or the beginnings of the trial. So Calpurnia is left on a Sunday with the children and decides to take them to First Purchase, which is used for gambling by the whites in the evenings, but it's very much viewed with reverence and honoured by the actual black community. They don't have hymn books. They have to just follow Zebo, who leads them in the choir. So it really is a very poor church. But the congregation really makes the most of what they have, so it is a really very positive reflection of the black community. Jem and Scout arrive, but Lula is the only one to object. She doesn't like the fact that Calpurnia is trying to break the segregation, the separation of black and white people. Obviously, she feels great resentment that white children will be trespassing as she sees it on black territory, but Calpurnia puts her right. And stands up for the children, and the majority, everyone except Lula, actually honours the children and welcomes them, of course, because their father is defending Tom. And Alexandra moves in. Obviously, Atticus is busy with the trial, so she thinks that she can support the family, and in particular, help to right the wrongs as she sees it, that Atticus has made these mistakes, in particular how he's bringing up Scout. Alexandra wants to become a lady, and she plays hostess to the missionary society. She has the women over for tea, and she really integrates well into Macon very quickly. She fits in very well with their attitudes. Obviously, Alexandra has some influence over Atticus. Not many people do, but at her bidding, Atticus tries to stress the importance of the family name and that they should behave as such and behave honourably and not mix with certain people. But he abandons that attempt at the very end of chapter 13. Scout says it takes a woman to do that kind of thing, to manipulate in that way, so it's quite a negative reflection of the female stereotype. Atticus realises that he can't pretend to be that kind of person, so he doesn't want to influence his children in that way. He wants them to make their own decisions. Chapter 14, Atticus defends Calpurnia against Alexandra, and Alexandra is actually quite racist in her attitude. She doesn't like Calpurnia mixing with the children. She doesn't like her influence. She'd rather displace Calpurnia and have Calpurnia out the door. But Atticus defends her and stands up for her and refuses to let her go. Scout feels patronised by Jem. This is Jem growing up now. Talking at the very beginning, Jem condescended to walk her to school, and now Jem is really saying that Scout should listen to Alexandra and do as she's told. And not bother Atticus because he's busy with the trial, and Scout really doesn't like that. She feels patronised and still willing to stand up for Jem. So long as Jem fights back, she's quite happy that they're equals. That's what it means to her. Dill's found under the bed after running away, so he returns to the plot, so he actually gets to see the trial. He talks about how he's not valued, so it's a comparison to Atticus's parenting style. He's very good at showing value and pride and sensitivity in dealing with his children. Dill is not happy with his new stepfather, so he runs away to Aunt Rachel and the children back in Macon. Now, Hecate does warn Atticus that there might be trouble ahead. He says that he can't really prevent this kind of wave of prejudice and intolerance that is likely to be a real danger to Tom. So Atticus goes to guard the jail, and of course Hecate's tip comes to fruition. It proves right, because the lynch mob arrives to kill Tom, essentially to drag him from his cell and hang him from the nearest tree or the nearest lamppost, which was something that had happened at that time. Okay, so Atticus goes there, very brave, very courageous again, still very casual in his manner, doesn't